And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather, next storm pushing rain and gusty winds into the southwest coast and inland, not quite to the Kuskokwim Mountains, but possibly, and definitely northward here across St. Lawrence Island toward the Bering Strait. Rain and wind into the Alaska Peninsula. Stays wet over the Pribilost. Once the front goes through, those winds will drop off, and pretty gusty winds with a lot of showers over the Aleutians. Interior looking pretty good. Stays mostly clear or variably cloudy. Showers lingering but slowly diminishing here over the eastern Alaska Range Copper River Basin. Risk of a shower or two along the North Gulf Coast. This low center now sliding a little farther to the east after being just south of Cape St. Elias today, this afternoon. The front stalling out and weakening over the Panhandle, so it'll stay wet with periods of rain through tonight. And then for tomorrow, that finally weakens and kicks into Canada, leaving some diminishing shower conditions behind with increasing chances of some clearing, especially out along the coast through the afternoon. Still partly and mostly cloudy or mostly cloudy scattered showers over the southeast interior. And with this system coming in, south to southeast flow increasing here, so that's going to keep the moisture in Prince William Sound, southern Kenai Peninsula, especially western Prince William Sound, with rain, Kodiak Island pushing up in toward Kamishak Bay, southern Cook Inlet, Seldovia, Homer. Staying dry, northern Cook Inlet up into the Palmer area, Susitna Valley as well. Mostly sunny, central interior up to the Arctic coast. And low pressure here keeps it wet, St. Lawrence Island, Pribilost, gusty winds. Small craft advisories, possibly gale force winds just north of the Aleutians there with showers, but improving out to the west. Then on Tuesday, that low tracks into the coastline here and weakens with much better conditions out to the west. Weak trough, some showers there for the Seward Peninsula, and pretty good chance of rain here across most of southern Alaska with showers and breezy conditions behind this front from the Barren Islands, Kodiak into the Alaska Peninsula. Rainfall chances increasing once again along the north coast of the Panhandle in the afternoon. Otherwise, high pressure keeping the remainder of the area there dry. Coastal water forecast for the south coast tomorrow. South to southwest winds 15 knots, southeast at 15 for the central coast, and the north coast winds east at 15 knots. Lynn Canal, southeast winds at 10, south at 10 knots also for Stevens Passage, so pretty light winds there. And Clarence Strait, southeast 15. Outlook for Tuesday, west-southwest wind 15 knots on the south coast, central coast, south to southeast winds 15 knots. And stronger winds here for the north coast, small craft advisories, east to southeast winds 25 to 30 knots. Inside waters and channels stay pretty light. Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage south at 10, and Clarence Strait northwest at 15. Eastern North Gulf Coast, east winds 15 knots, Prince William Sound, southeast winds at 15, northeast 15 for the western North Gulf Coast. Variable winds 10 to 15 knots for Cook Inlet, southeast 25 here for Kamishak Bay, southeast at about 20 for the Barren Islands. And for Cook Inlet on Tuesday, east to southeasterlies 15 to 20 knots. Small craft advisories there for Kamishak Bay, southeast at 25, south at 20 for the Barren Islands. And now some gale warnings here. Gale warnings in the forecast for Prince William Sound. East winds 35 knots, seas 9 feet there in the forecast anyway. And good gales here for the eastern North Gulf Coast. Southeast winds 40 knots, seas around 10 feet. Kodiak Island for Monday, south to southwest winds at 20 knots. Southeast winds 20 knots for Bristol Bay and the Alaska Peninsula. South to southwest winds 25 to 30 knots with seas running 4 to 8 feet. And then for Tuesday, good westerlies here across the Alaska Peninsula, 25 to 30 knots with seas running 7 to 14 feet. Bristol Bay, south winds at 20 knots with 7-foot seas. And Kodiak Island, small craft advisories, southwest winds 25 knots. And for the eastern Aleutians, on Monday, good southwest winds at 30 knots, seas up to 14 or 13 feet. Gale warnings, Adak and Atka, as well as out here toward Amchitka Island. West winds 35 knots, northwest 35 to 40 knot winds from Kiska to Shemya. And then for Tuesday, those winds lighten up, especially out here over the far western Aleutians down to southwest at 20 knots. Adak and Atka, West-southwest at 30 knots, and it's looking at gale force westerlies here for the Fox Islands at 35 knots with seas running 11 to 17 feet. And for the southwest coast tomorrow, gale warning, south to southeast winds 35 knots, southeast 35 for St. Lawrence Island, east 30 knots for Norton Sound, southwest at 30 for the Pribilof Islands with 13-foot seas, southeast 20 knots with 15-foot seas for St. Matthew Island. And for Tuesday, Pribilof Islands, St. Matthew Island, northwest winds 30 knots, seas 11 to 16 feet, southeast at 20 for Kuskokwim Bay coastline here from Nunivak Island south to Cape Newenham, southeast at 20. East winds 10 knots, St. Lawrence Island, Yukon Delta coast, and about 15 for Norton Sound. Chukchi Sea tomorrow, east-southeast winds 15 knots, western Arctic coast south at 15, central coast southeast of 15, east side up there, east winds 15 knots, 3 to 4 foot seas. And for Tuesday, eastern Beaufort Sea coast, east winds 5 to 10 knots, central coast about the same, with 10-knot winds out of the east for much of the Arctic coast on Tuesday. Chukchi Sea east northeasterlies at 15 knots.